we are proceeding to the last talk of today. It will be given by Renata Raidou, and her talk will be about taking visualization off the screen. So let's see what is hidden behind this title of the talk. So Renata, whenever we are ready, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for having me here today. I'm Renata Raidou, and I am an assistant professor at TU Wien. And today I'm very excited because I want to talk about taking visualization off the screen, which is something that I usually don't talk very much about. So my main topic of work is visual analytics, but I saw in the program you have already quite a bunch of these kind of talks. So I thought, yeah, let's make a change. And also I'm extremely excited because it's my first live lecture after, I don't know, 1,000 million years. So it might be that you have seen these kind of images before. So nowadays, as you heard already from the first talk today, due to the continuously advancing imaging technologies, due to the continuous improvements of computational power, all the new algorithms and so on, we managed to have these kind of beautiful and very realistic renderings of the human body, and we can very easily look into different kinds of pathologies, but also anatomy. But looking into the human body is something that people have been doing already for quite some centuries. So this is actually one of my favorite paintings. So it's the anatomy lesson of Dr. Nicolas Tulp. It was done by Rembrandt in the 1600s. And you can see there how people used to look at the human body. So they were just opening up the poor guy there laying in the middle, and they were looking inside. So although this might be enjoyable for some of us, others might not find it like really nice because it's quite invasive. So when actually visualization came around, we could see inside the human body without actually having to make it so gross. So this indicates that actually educating ourselves about anatomy has been very interesting for many years. And there have been two main ways that actually people have looked at the human anatomy. So in 2D, like you can see on the left side with just some illustrations, or with models, 3D models on the right. So these 3D models can be digital on our screen, or they can be physical. Maybe you have seen these puppets that we all had in biology classes when we went to school. Again, I will not mention how many years ago. And we have, let's say, these two modalities, 2D versus 3D. So these things are not new. For example, here you can see some anatomical illustrations from Da Vinci, for example, the 15th century, up there, Vesalius, 16th century, and much, much before that, Pussy Hank in the 10th century. And you can see here how actually their idea of how the lungs looked like. I mean, I find these drawings like extremely fascinating. So if you think about it, that this was 10 centuries ago, it was already quite accurate, let's say, or at least illustrative. So sorry for the grossness of it. You can see here 3D examples. So you can see some brains, for example, made from papier-mâché up there, wax sculptures of the heart, some moulages. So these are from the Narrenturm. So if you are coming from Vienna, I really suggest that you go and you take a look at them. Or up there, there are the anatomical Venuses. They were extremely popular in the 18th century. Or like this one is called the Mother. So it was a woman that was pregnant and she got killed by a chariot. And then they kept actually her body and the baby, and they created, let's say, this wax thing around her. So all these were ways to show anatomies, pathologies, structures, for example, like there, the heart. And these are things that were way before actually we could make, for example, 3D prints and so on like we do today. Yeah, so this is one more example that I wanted to show because I found it actually very interesting. I always thought that the body world exhibitions were really nice, but then I found out that there was a guy doing this kind of stuff 3 centuries before. So the Fragonard, and they have exactly the same kind of exhibit. So a guy on a horse, and you can see some really nice here depictions of how the skeleton of the horse and the human look like, also the muscles, tendons, everything. So all this indicates to us that it might be that in older times we had a lot of these kind of physical models or physical exhibits, let's call them like this, of the human body, but then medical imaging started showing up, then medical visualization started showing up, and all these physical models, they started, let's say, declining. And in the last few years, there is the domain of data physicalization that is appearing, and is actually promoting this idea that we need more physical models, not only of medical data, but of data in the world around us, to show us actually how things are working, let's say. So the main motivation behind that is that this is super nice, it's super cool, it's super realistic, it's really accurate scientifically, as Bernard said before, but you can't touch it. So data physicalization is actually a rich and vast research area that studies the use of physical models in a way that it can actually convey data. So this is actually the definition that was given by Dragicevic very recently in the HCI handbook. And here on the right-hand side, you can also see a very recent data physicalization approach. So this is supposed to be the heart, the white part, and you can see the blood flow through it. And these vertical slices over there, they practically represent, let's say, crosscuts of the heart, and manipulate with them, you can interact with them in order to understand better how the blood flows through the human heart. And there is a very large collection over here, the DataFiz.org collection. So it's not only medical data, you can see here a lot of things like the periodic table, highways, all kinds of data that you can imagine. And I recommend that you take a look. It's a quite interesting database, actually. And all these are physical visualizations that they date back to 5,500 before Christ. What did I do? Okay. So in data physicalizations, we have several categories of, let's say, displays. So we might have ambient displays, pixel sculptures, object augmentations, wearable visualizations, data sculptures, or modality displays. I'm not going to talk about the non-orangey ones. I'm just going to focus on these three, the object augmentation, the wearable visualization, and the data sculpture, because those are the types of display that we actually encounter most in the domain of medical data physicalization. And today, I will later on focus mainly on the data sculptures, and I will show you some examples of our recent work on that direction. So one example of wearable physicalization, some of you might know more about it, is the so-called virtuality. So here, the person in the back is wearing the t-shirt with some markers on it, and there is another guy holding his phone and showing it on in an augmented reality application the different organs of the human body. So this is, let's say, a generalized view of the anatomy inside. It's not personalized to the specific person that is wearing the t-shirt. Then these are examples of augmented objects. So these are, let's say, kind of estimates or approximations of molecular structures. So I don't really remember which one exactly was this, but they have, let's say, an object, the first one on the left, with a marker, and then they augment on the surface directly, either with some kind of leaves or these kind of surfaces on top of it to practically show additional characteristics of the data. And regarding data sculptures, the most known one, I think, to all of us is here, like this, the helical structure, the double helix of the DNA. This is the way actually that Watson and Crick discovered, say, how the structure of our DNA looks like. Other data sculptures that are around us come often from 3D printing. So this is the most commonly encountered types of sculptures. And here you can see a very old, I think it's something like 5 years ago or even more, of 3D printed heart taken from actually data from patients. And something like this costs around $700 to $1,000, which means that it's expensive and also it's complex to make because you need to have the patient's data, you need to have the algorithms in order to extract the information that you need to keep from that. You need to have access also to some 3D printing software and also to the actual 3D printer, and it's quite time costly. So there are other ways of creating data sculptures, and some years ago, Janssen et al., so I consider her, let's say, the founder of data physicalization at CAI, she proposed an extension of the basic information visualization pipeline to cover also data physicalization. So if you're familiar with the basic InfoVis pipeline, you might see that there are some steps here that they are both, let's say, in the InfoVis pipeline and in the DataVis pipeline, but there are some additional things that convey, for example, let's say this right part, let's say the interaction on the user side, or also how the user, for example, interprets the information, how the user processes all these information that they are given, and so on. So today, I will show you 3 recent examples of data sculptures that I have been doing with colleagues of mine. The main credit here goes to Marvin Schindler that is sitting back there. So if you hear that I'm making any mistakes here, jump in. And with these examples that I'm showing you, I would mainly focus on how we create, let's say, conceptually these ideas. So what were, let's say, the concepts, the requirements that we had in mind. So the reasoning of why we do these sculptures and how we actually make sure that these sculptures fulfill their intended requirements. And I will start with the first one, so which is slice and dice. So a physicalization workflow for anatomical edutainment. So all these approaches are for edutainment. So I started talking at the beginning about anatomical education, but our idea in all these data sculptures is actually a focus on the edutainment part, which means educational and entertainment. So through, let's say, building something, building these sculptures, you can educate yourself, while at the same time, let's say, you have this satisfaction from building these sculptures. So this is how a slice and dice of a human aneurysm looks like. So you can see a bulge there. Now it's on the right side in the spine. So this is like the typical aneurysm CT data set that most probably all of us have played with at some point. And you can see that we use like a very basic concept of having these perpendicular intersecting transparent foils. And we create, let's say, a fake perception of a 3D object. So how did we come up with this? So we wanted something that represents anatomical data or pathological data And it can actually be useful to a user that has absolutely no or very little knowledge of anatomy. And also, this user most probably has no knowledge of visualization or physicalization. So if most probably I would give, let's say, a data sculpture to my mom, she would be able to tell, okay, this is this part of the body, but it doesn't mean that she necessarily has some visualization knowledge. Then we want to build something with the idea in mind that it can accommodate both structures that we often encounter in medical data visualization. So anatomical meshes or anatomical volumes. Also, the way that we create this kind of data sculpture should not require from the user to interact too much with a given system so that they can actually build at the end the sculpture. And at the end, what comes out of it should be quite easy to assemble and also engaging. About the assembly, one of the co-authors actually here, she is like a complete freak about puzzles, and she really had this idea, yeah, we have to make it like very simple, very intuitive to put together. So if it's difficult, nobody ever is going to play with it, to say the least. It should also be time and cost efficient. And finally, we don't want to use very expensive materials. We also want to have like very commonly encountered technologies. So for example, we don't want to have a 3D printer. We want to just be able to do everything with materials and printers that we can easily find around us. So these were our requirements, and our conceptual choices in this case were that we want to make sure that we do not require any kind of fine tuning of visual properties. So this has to do with the requirement that I mentioned before, that people do not know anything about visualization. So you cannot really ask them to start playing with transfer functions and so on. Although there is very nice work from Stefan there that they try to explain transfer functions also in a physicalization way. So then our second conceptual choice is that we really wanted to have slice forms. So why? They are actually quite well known and used, let's say, as puzzles for kids. So when kids like start to learn playing, like it's quite often that they have, let's say, this kind of 3D puzzles. And finally, for the required materials and technologies, we started actually building all these using paper because it was, let's say, cheaper and also more ecologically friendly. But we kept in mind that we wanted to have these transparent sheets because it allows you to see through, and also it creates, let's say, these pseudo 3D appearance. So this is our pipeline. So just to mention here, this work was going on for something like a year and a half because it was not our main work. We were just doing it for the fun of it. So some things like were done before others, but actually there was a main pipeline in mind, which was this one. It consisted of these 6 steps. And we start with taking our data and processing them. So as I said before, we deal in our pipeline both with mesh data and also with volumetric data. So mesh data, there are a lot of available data sets online. So the most common being anatomography, which is like from a Japanese database actually. And our idea was, okay, if I actually have mesh data, somehow I need to still be able to use them. But it doesn't really work well with our concept of slice forms. So our first step is to convert this mesh data into volumetric images, into volumes, sorry. And then once we have these volumes, we create some fixed visual properties. So these fixed visual properties mean that actually we have a dedicated transfer function for each kind of volume. So do I want to show what kind of structures? I create a specific preset transfer function for it. The reason for that is, as I mentioned before, our user knows nothing about visualization. On top of that, we cannot have one transfer function that fits everything. There is plenty of research in that. Things are not completely solved for all types of medical images, not for all types of pathologies, and so on. So also there is a lot of literature about visibility in renderings and so on, and we couldn't simply incorporate all this. So this is one of the choices that we made in order also to simplify our lives. So once we have this preprocessing step, we move on to start creating our slices. So in the slice retrieval part, we actually want to create, we have a volume and we need to create these representative slices. So what does it mean to create representative slices? It means that we want to have lattices, so stripes of materials that indicate, let's say, the very significant parts of the volume. So what does it mean, significant? It means that we want to have, let's say, a slice that actually is able to convey maximum information of the inner structures. So here we created a specific OCTA formulation for these paper crafts in order to accommodate for the underlying volumetric data. And our OCTAs are actually responsible for generating a partition of our volume. And then this is, so the first step is we get slices that are saying, okay, these are the most important slices that you have to take out of your volume. And the second part is actually telling you which slices maybe you should merge together somehow, because it would make it easier for you to assemble the paper crafts. So let's look at the OCTA formulation for volumes. So this is, let's say, the classic OCTA, where we have one part of the volume is split up into its denser components. In our case, we don't split based on the density, we split based on importance. So how do we define this importance? So our importance comes out of our definition of the transfer function. So in case you are not fully familiar with the definition of the transfer function, let's say very simply, it's a function that maps properties from the volume to visual properties. So practically, let's say, if I have a city data set, Hounsfield units to color and transparency. So actually, we have our transfer function there on the first image on the left. We have like a specific definition of it. So the scalar values, the opacity values, and there from these opacity values that we have in our transfer function, we define importance. So something that is very important has to be shown. So if it has to be shown, it has to be more opaque. And once we have, let's say, the parts that are more opaque, so let's say these gray parts would be all hidden, the red parts would be semi-transparent, and the yellow parts would be completely opaque, we have created our OCTA partition depending on this importance. So what does it mean? The first here where it says sagittal slice with a blue. Does this thing have a, yeah, so over here. So we start by splitting, let's say, our volume through a sagittal slice and a coronal slice. And then we take each one of these quarters and we look, are things like important here? Yeah, in this one here to the left, bottom left, everything is important. It should be split in this way. Up there, I'm not going to split it because this part, the gray part, is not important, so it's not visible and it's going to be hidden anyway, so I don't care about it. The same also in this part, and here also I'm going to split it because I need to create this split between the yellow and the red one. So we move on iteratively, and then at the end, we have to think, as I said before, a little bit what happens if I have a lot of tiny little slices. It means that I'm going to take a lot of time on actually to assemble everything together. So we have one step here that actually optimizes and merges slices that are close together so that they can be considered as part of the bigger skeleton, let's say, and I can save time. So this is just one example. So instead of actually splitting it here to the middle, I can just create one unified slice for this, the left and the right part. So now comes the most important part, which is, am I able to assemble my paper craft? So here, there are a lot of things that play a very big role, and this was actually the hardest part in this paper craft realization. So we have to figure out how slices can intersect. So I remind you, they're just going one inside the other. And also, how am I supposed to assemble this thing? So can I actually construct it? So here we actually characterize types of hinges. So you can either have two, let's say, slices that they are just intersecting each other, one that is going through, or one and that there is a stopper, for example. And we had some very basic optimization rules, let's say, where we actually define what has to be inserted first and what follows during the assembly. So I'm not going to go through all the details because otherwise I'm not going to finish ever. But the very basic here is that the order actually matters in our assembly. And through this optimization, actually, we are able to give to our user, let's say, a list of the order that he or she has to follow in order to assemble everything. And we have some soft or hard constraints in our optimization in order to relax a little bit the problem. So, as I said at the beginning, we need to print all this. So there are a lot of issues. Again, here we want to make very good use of the material, so I don't want to print a lot of pages, let's say, and waste. And also, we need to keep this intuitive order for the easier assembly. So we have to somehow propagate this ordering from the previous step to the printing. So we use here a packing approach that actually makes sure that things that are, let's say, close together in the volume, so nearby slices, they also have to be nearby printed on the paper. But the proximity is also respecting the order of our assembly, and also that we can, let's say, print our paper craft as big as possible within the given amount of materials that we have. So in the paper placement, actually, we create a vector where we have the positioning of the slices, like the center of the slices, and also the order of the assembly. So the first three components are the XYZ of the center of the slice, and then the D is the order of the assembly. And then we do some clustering there. And we create a partitioning that actually is based on this clustering. And we use a rectangle bin packing algorithm in order to create, let's say, or to create something like this, where this whole rectangle is, let's say, our paper, and we have here each part, like one of the smaller slices, also taking into account the optimal assembly. And at the end, we assemble everything together. And here I'm just showing you some mesh data examples. So this is just a toy data set that we had with a number of spheres. You can see here how it looks like, a head, and this is a heart. The hardest of all was this one because it has two hinges somewhere there, and I really couldn't assemble it. And it almost made me cry at 6 o'clock in the morning, I remember. And over here on the right, I have another, like, this is just a rendered example. So it's a bunny with 4 hearts inside, and you can see that I can actually adaptively change the number of levels for my octree. And then the harder, higher these levels, the more slices I get. And I'm 100% sure that these would be practically impossible to assemble. I didn't try, I'm scared. So also with some volumetric data. So this one was also very, very nasty. So this is my shoulder, actually. So I broke it a couple of years back and I have the data of it. It was not fun to break it. It was not fun to make it also. And this one was quite fine. It just had a lot of slices because there are a lot of small details, the foot data set. And this is the aneurysm that I showed you before. And here with the aneurysm, again, the same, like you can see the level of details. Also, this one would be extremely difficult to build. So at the end, after we did all this, we had to evaluate our slice forms. And we had to evaluate, first of all, is it possible to do them? And we had like 10 participants here. So actually, it comes out from this study that it's possible to do it with like deviations from person to person. And the most important thing here is that there were people that they were ignoring the order of assembly, although we provided it to them. And guess what? They were the slowest. And then we had to evaluate a little bit the educational value as much as you can evaluate it. So we just had like 7 people here. And they had to tell what parts they would actually see. And it was quite interesting because when you show people anatomy, they are able to recognize things. So it could be also because of prior knowledge, I don't know. But as soon as you would give them, for example, pathologies, or they would confuse things like left to right as well. So this was, let's say, the most interesting things that we saw here. So I'm going to skip this. So did we actually fulfill our requirements? So all participants that we had, like none of them was actually like, I don't know, a doctor or something. So we just had a nurse in the educational part. They could actually complete them. So we could work both with meshes and volumes. We didn't need a lot of interactions, like the whole system requires 3 clicks just to print. Then like the feasibility evaluation showed that we can actually build this kind of paper crafts, but they are not always very easy to assemble. And also, like, it's quite fast for most of the people. It's not very expensive, and it just requires very easy materials. So what happened after this one? So what happened after this one, the most important part here is actually that people requested a more organic appearance for the slices. So they were really troubled with why things always have to be squared and why can't they actually follow the shape of the model, for example. So this is the next thing that we started thinking. And here comes Marvin with his work on the anatomical edutainer. So this was work that was presented at least 2020. And you can see here a 2D version of it and there a 3D version of it. And our idea here is let's follow these organic shapes, and also let's provide some visibility mechanism to the user. By visibility mechanism, we actually take advantage of the light modulating properties, and also we look into how light is absorbed. So here in this triangle, every color, if you look at the opposite side, is actually canceling the other one. So for example, blue is opposite to yellow, red to cyan, green to magenta. So what happens here is that if I overimpose a lens on this skull where I have rendered different parts with cyan, yellow, and magenta, yeah, I can actually hide the magenta parts and the yellow because of the light absorption properties, and I only end up seeing the skull, which is rendered in cyan. The same happens here with the nerves, which are originally rendered in yellow. So we just take advantage of these properties. And in addition to that, we decided to try if we can actually make it into paper crafts. So our benefits here is that we can show multiple structures that actually would hide each other. And we can add also, let's say, this playfulness to the whole story, where people can look with these lenses or even with lights, external or internal, at the different nested structures. This is how our pipeline looks like. So we start with the raw data, we process them a little bit. Let's say here we choose only the skull. We create the 3 channels for our visualization. This is the visual representation of the blended renderings. And at the end, we have our physicalization either in 2D or in 3D. So here I'm just showing some examples. So these are all digital examples. So under specific lenses or lights, we see dedicated, we unveil dedicated structures that have been rendered with one color channel, one color, sorry. And here you can see afterwards, we can actually create these paper crafts by unfolding by unfolding like on a 2D plane the structure and then being able to reassemble it. So here I'm just showing you some examples that we had. So the upper one is 2D and the lower one is 3D. So in the upper one, we have the head with the 3 structures, cyan, magenta, and yellow blended over here. And you can see what happens if I superimpose a different voice. The blue one is a little bit hard actually. And in the 3D case, this was tried actually with external lights, but you can actually have internal lights as well. So inside the model, and this could be used, for example, if you would have very big models. So yeah, this is the internal case and external case. Okay. So very quickly, I'll just show you like in 5 minutes our latest work here. We had this problem that the previous case was able to show only 3 structures. So we only have 3 channels, we can only take advantage of these 3. But how can we actually introduce more structures into our paper crafts? So that's why we actually decided to work on nested paper crafts. So you can see here on the left, it's an opened up paper craft. So the first level is the outer part of the skull, and you can see still 3 channels on it. And the inner part is the brain, and again, you can see 3 different channels of that. So you might be wondering, is that so hard? I'll just show you this. So we talked to a designer of these kind of paper crafts. This dinosaur head here, forgive me for not knowing the name of the dinosaur, has something like 60 or 70 edges in the paper craft. And it takes him something like 10 days to make the design of the paper craft. And it's actually not such a big model. So in our case, we have much more. So we had even models that they had, I don't know, 200, 250 edges. So I'm not talking about the assembly time, I'm talking about the construction time. It would have taken this guy ages to generate them. So practically over here, we had a workflow that allowed us to create these nestings using the similar approaches that we had before. So for the visibility, it's exactly the same as before. For the unfolding, it's almost the same as before. We just have this additional nesting part in it. I will only show you very quickly. I hate it when this happens. Very quickly, our pipeline, which so we have the whole pipeline here in order to be able to create, let's say, this nesting, to introduce this nesting factor, which also includes things like how does one level fit into another, how do I ensure that I have the maximum visibility inside inner structures and so on. And also the most important part is the stability, because we include here the part where you actually have to remove half of the paper craft and everything would practically fall apart. So we have actually even a physics simulation into these. So I just want to show you a couple of examples. That's why I'm running through it, and they are here. So here you can see Marvin trying to have some fun with the paper crafts and actually assembling them. These are disassembled paper crafts, different levels of the pelvis. So here you can see that you can actually open up the pelvis, and this is the human prostate. And then you can actually use lights to see only the bones. Just some other examples, we tried it with the plant cell. So here you can see just the hierarchy of the nesting. In the middle, you have a digital version of the model, and on the right-hand side, the actual paper craft. The same with the torso. So this is actually really nice. You can open it up and you have like multiple nested structures. So the lower, the pelvic structures here and the lungs. And again, we had to do some evaluations where we looked mainly, is this possible? And here, like, it was not as easy as in the first case, because to create this head that I showed you at the beginning, like in the first slide, it takes something like an hour and a half, which is like a very considerable amount of time. For example, I give it to a kid, I don't think that they would have the attention span to sit for an hour and a half and do it. There are additional indicators that we added later on, and it reduced the time by something like 15 minutes or so. And this was also an idea that came to us, how can we make this much easily for the future? So here, like what came out of this evaluation was also that if I would take these kind of models and show them to a patient, it is, I would say, quite unprofessional. But first of all, it's not meant for these kind of purposes. And second of all, I don't think that a patient would appreciate to see themselves like that. However, I mentioned the kid before because this is actually a main target audience, let's say, children, and how they can actually learn through playing, through doing about the human anatomy. So we have several limitations like distortions, or like the sizes have to be significant, not only for visibility reasons, but also for being able to assemble these kind of things. And also sometimes things don't fit perfectly together. And the construction time remains a very big issue for these kind of models, but at least we kind of helped, let's say, people that are actually generating these models in creating these kind of things really, really fast. So in the future, we still have a very, very long way to go. But I would consider it, let's say, a very nice first investigation of how far we can go with physicalization. And hopefully this opens ways for other domains as well, not only medical visualization. And you can touch this. But I put this slide because ideally I had planned to take them with me and I forgot them at home. So yeah, you cannot touch them still. Okay. So I'm really sorry I took much longer than I was supposed to, but if you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great. Thanks a lot for this very playful presentation. It was really amazing. So time for questions. Yeah, we are having one here.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the awesome presentation. I was wondering, the biggest contender for this would be the traditional 3D modeling. And the problem with 3D modeling is you have to have a manifold mesh, a mesh without any holes in it. It looks like your approach doesn't need this. Is this right?
Well, I mean, for the types of models that we did it, like we did not have this kind of issues, and where we had this kind of issues, we needed to amend it. So first of all, at least for the last case, we do not work directly on the mesh. So if you would actually go and try to follow exactly the pelvis, let's say, it would be extremely difficult to not to generate, but to assemble, and maybe also to generate because it has, let's say, all these curvatures, but and also holes and these kind of things. So this is like the last part that I actually went very fast through, but we are working on approximations. So that's why we have, let's say, this kind of, let's say, hull, convex hull around the structures. And this is how we practically circumvent this problem as well.
Interesting, thank you.
Thank you. So other question? Yeah.
Thanks very much for the colorful display of education that can be imparted for also children. But I have a question regarding the color representation. What if, for instance, I'm colorblind?
Yeah, so in this case, like this is not working for you. Although in our evaluation, we had one person that is colorblind, and I mean, I don't know, he kind of actually recognized things there, but I think it also depends like on what kind of color blindness we're talking about. So to be safe, I would say that no, this is not, I mean, it plays like with light absorption, so no.
And for instance, even if I'm not colorblind, I remarked that, for example, at slide 57, the blue filter isn't quite doing the representation justice as it should be. I mean, from this distance, it might be quite difficult to see the ramifications of the blood vessels.
So you mean like the upper right one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this one is actually not meant to be seen as it is. So you would never look at the representation like as in the upper right side. Like you would always look at it based using the foils or the light. So this is like a blended version of it that, yeah, sure, maybe you can see very nicely the lungs and very nicely the bones, but it's not intended to be seen with the naked eye.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I think some more questions. Or comments?
Hello, hi. Thank you for the amazing presentation. I would just like to know that I think it should be possible even for the colorblind person to see it, because when you block the light using the foil, you then actually don't look at the color at all. You look only on the intensity level. And even here, if we just deleted all the colors and made it black and white, it would still convey the same information. So it doesn't really matter. Even people with I think any kind of color blindness should be able to use this. So amazing.
I mean, I never thought about it because, you know, like, yeah, the colors, a lot of them. But maybe I should have thought about it earlier. But thanks. I think I'm gonna check it out.
Okay. Hi, thank you as well from my side, of course. It was really interesting. So the first part, like the models that are orthogonal, they're all like generated from automatically. Is there as well like research for the freeform models that those models are getting generated automatically, like based on point clouds? So it's not like that reconstruction needs to be like manually.
Yeah.
So is there always like manual rework, or is it like the whole like print comes out from based on data point clouds?
So we have like data comes in like for a specific amount of data. It's not that I can put like whatever I want and then it should come out. So because in the first one, in the slice forms, you need to have a transfer function accompanying, let's say, the specific data set that you have. So if I would put another aneurysm CT data set, I cannot guarantee that it would also work. So you have to have data set and transfer function. If you have a person that has the knowledge to create this transfer function, then it's just data transfer function in slice form printout coming out, and then you assemble it yourself.
Yeah.
For this second part, we actually have the whole body, and then you need to pick part. So we have data from this Japanese database that I mentioned before, and tomography, and also from some other models for the biological models. And then you just need to pick them. Interactively, you pick which structures you want to include in there, and then it also comes out. So it's also a matter of a couple of clicks and some seconds of waiting.
And so you can set parameters like how many folds you want to have or something like this as well?
In the slides form, you can pick the number of levels that you want to go, so how hard you want to make it, let's say. In the paper crafts, you can pick, let's say, how gross you want the model to be, like, so how approximate or how more close to, more tight, let's say, tighter to the mesh. So obviously, like the more approximate you make it, the easier it is to assemble afterwards. For computation, it doesn't really matter because it's just super fast. But yeah, good luck with the assembly.
Okay.
I did myself the head and yeah.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
To be fair, I
Okay.
suffered. I think Marvin is having some PTSD there.
Yeah. So it would be maybe as well interesting to like choose upfront like how many phases you want to have, that you know like how long the assembly time will be.
Yeah, and also like the bigger the model it is, the easier of course it is to assemble it.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you very much. Some other questions still? It attracted a lot of attention.
Thank you very much for
If not,
listening to
then
me.
thank you once again, Renata. Thank you.